Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 213 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be discussing the new movie Ghostbusters. This reboot of the classic comedy from 1984 stars 4 women as an all-new ghost-busting team, and has been controversial with many fans. And this will involve spoilers, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by 4 guests. So first up, we've got Angela Watercutter, who you may remember from our panel on Jupiter Ascending back in episode 138, and our panel on Penny Dreadful back in episode 210. She's a writer and editor for Wired, and she's also the main person behind the scenes who helps get our posts up on Wired.com each week. And you should all go check out her recent articles. No matter how good it is, the new Ghostbusters can't win, and we love you, Kate McKinnon, and thanks for saving Ghostbusters. So Angela, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Then next up, we've got Carmen Maria Machado, who you may remember from our panel on the Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy back in episode 177. She's a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop and the Clarion Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Workshop, and her work has appeared in The New Yorker, Granta, and Best Horror of the Year. Her debut short story collection, Her Body and Other Parties, is forthcoming from Grey Wolf Press. So Carmen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
And also joining us today is Jennifer Cross. She's the lead organizer of Just Right Chicago, which is Chicago's largest writing group dedicated to providing a safe, inclusive space for writers of all genres and levels. Her article, We've Made It to Magrathea, appeared in Queers Destroy Science Fiction, and she's also spoken about diversity and representation at conventions such as C2E2 and WisCon. She can also be seen at various conventions fire dancing while cosplaying women of color, and you can read her blog Outside the Box over at notyourexpectation.wordpress.com. So Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Hi Dave, thanks for having me.
And also joining us today is Carol Pinchefsky. She's a writer for Blaster and Geek and Sundry, and has also been a writer for Forbes and Mac Life. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, Time Out New York, PC Gamer, and Lightspeed Magazine, and she's also interviewed celebrities such as Neil Gaiman, Matt Smith, Daniel Craig, and Lucy Lawless. So Carol, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Okay, and so the first thing I just want to talk about is the original Ghostbusters, because the original Ghostbusters was a very important movie to me. It was actually the first movie that I went to see multiple times in the theater. I think I went to see it about 5 times in the theater with my dad, and I just have very fond memories of that movie. And so I'm just curious how you feel about that original Ghostbusters movie. So let's start off with Angela. What kind of memories do you have about the original Ghostbusters?
I don't remember if I saw it in the theater, but I definitely remember that it was in sort of constant rotation in the VCR growing up as a kid. And I believe there is actual photographic proof of this on Wired somewhere that I will send to anybody who asks. But I was the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man for Halloween one year, which equated to putting on my dad's sweatpants and my mom stuffing them with pillows and then painting my face and, making me a little, white hat. It was a great place to stash candy. So yeah, I mean, I definitely had sort of a strong affection for that movie growing up. I think I rewatched it again recently in the lead up to the new film, and I'm now realizing there were a lot of, I guess for lack of a better term, adult jokes that I probably didn't get when I was in my trick-or-treating years. But I've always just had such a fondness for that movie, and following Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd and all those guys throughout the years, that's still where my head goes is those actors in that and those performances. So yeah, I mean, I had the same thing, the sort of mix of comedy and sort of sci-fi and stuff really kind of stuck with me and probably informed a lot of my future interests as an adult. So yeah.
And how about Carol? Are you a big Ghostbusters fan?
Yeah, and I have been since the beginning. I got to see it in New York City on opening weekend, and I can assure you the entire audience was just screaming with laughter from the beginning to the ending. I mean, people absolutely loved it. I couldn't stop laughing as well. I really was rolling on the floor laughing, but it affected me in one other particular way. I had a mad crush on Egon. Absolute mad crush on him all throughout high school because of Ghostbusters. So, I was very, very sad when the actor died, really.
Yeah. Well, and how about Jennifer? What's your Ghostbusters background?
Well, it's actually I guess I'm looking at it from a different perspective because I was born in the 80s. And so Ghostbusters is one of the first nerdy movies that I saw as a child. And as a child, there were a lot of things that went way over my head. So when I went back to watch it as an adult, I said, holy shit, how did my super conservative parents ever let me watch this? But still to this day, Ghostbusters has become it's become one of my favorite problematic fandoms because I can laugh at a lot of the jokes still, but I can't let certain aspects of the comedy just brush on by. Case in point is the first thing we see as Bill Murray as Dr. Peter Bateman is that he's kind of a predator and leching on one of his students. That's really disturbing given the gender and power dynamics set up in the university. But that's something that I wouldn't have recognized as a child that I recognize as an adult. Overall, I mean, I think, Dave, I quoted you in my email when you asked, would you like to do this podcast? I said, yes, and I'd be terrified beyond the capacity for rational thought.
And that was an Egon quote, by the way.
Egon's my boy. All right, I might have to fight you for Egon. I'm just saying.
Oh man.
I'm just letting you know. I might have to fight you for him. But yeah, the easiest way to sum it up is Ghostbusters is one of my problematic faves. But I am also a big believer that you can have problematic faves, and just because you're criticizing it doesn't mean that you don't love it. So.
Yeah. Well, so Carmen, do you want to pick up on anything Jennifer was just saying there?
Sure. Well, I mean, so my experience, Ghostbusters came out before I was born. So when I first saw it,
not the youngest person here.
So I didn't see it in theaters. I actually had this very strange experience where I saw both movies at a Christmas party that my parents took me to when I was maybe 6 or 7. And I was in a room with like every other child at the, whose parents were at the party, and they just sort of shuffled us into a room and turned on Ghostbusters. But I was too young to understand that it was a comedy, and it actually scared the bejesus out of me. And I had nightmares. In the sequel, somehow my brain like inverted the pink ooze with blood. So like for years I was terrified that like when you turned on the bathtub, like blood would come gushing out of the faucet. And I just sort of nursed these strange anxieties. And then I saw it when I was like a teenager, and I was like, oh, it's a comedy. Oh, that makes so much more sense. And then after that I enjoyed it. And like Jennifer, it's sort of seeing it as an adult, like I do really enjoy it despite its, I think, very like objectionable sort of sexist content. And yeah, so I mean, yeah, problematic fave. Definitely enjoyed it as an adult, but as a child, did not appreciate it for what it was until much later.
Right. Well, I mean, it's funny what you guys are saying about how much Ghostbusters changes when you watch it when you're 7 versus when you watch it when you're a teenager or an adult. And that was certainly the case for me, where I had no idea that Dana and Rick Moranis had sex. And I mean, I had seen the movie like 15 times, and then one time I'm just watching it and I was like, whoa, wait, what?
Well, the door shuts, I think. So it's kind of implied you don't see them have sex.
Right, but I can remember also saying to my dad, I just thought, as a kid, I just thought that Ghostbusters were just the coolest guys in the world. And I can remember when I watched the movie, I was 14 or something, and I watched it and I went to my dad and I said, Dad, I just watched Ghostbusters and the Ghostbusters are kind of losers. And he's like, yeah, that's like the whole point of the movie, like, But I just thought they were the most awesome guys as a kid, and it's just so funny, yeah, how and like as Jennifer's saying, there was a point I was like, wait, Peter Venkman's kind of a stalker. It was funny how these realizations just come to you as you get older.
But it also doesn't take away from the story. Now, we're a bunch of writers here, and we can actually appreciate a story with questionably moral characters. And for me, the story in the original Ghostbusters was much more solid than I thought the story in the new movie was.
Ditto that.
How about Angela? What do you think about that?
About this how good the story is. I mean, I think it was somebody a friend of mine texted me after I saw the movie and was like, what did you think, and what would you think if you hadn't seen the original? And I was, the way I was explaining is that it does sort of lack the story that the original one has. You sort of have to come into it with a little bit of that knowledge that this world exists. But then I was trying to remember, because I was so young seeing the first one, like the story of, four scientists who tackle ghosts wasn't really realistic to begin with. So, there's a whole lot of suspension of disbelief, I think, with the entire franchise. But I mean, the original definitely had a lot more nuance than this new one does. I mean, I was thinking about it when I was watching it the other night, like the new one, you don't know, like, where do these people live? Like, what were they doing 5 minutes before we sort of were dropped into their lives? Like, you get a little bit of backstory that, two of them had worked together on a book about ghosts before, and then it had created this rift in their friendship or whatever. But the Kate McKinnon character, she's just sort of there, she sort of just shows up, and you never know a whole lot about what happened with her background. And Patty, the Leslie Jones character, that she worked for the MTA, but that's about it. Like there's very little, I think, sort of fleshing out of characters, which with comedy kind of just happens, I think, sometimes. But there was definitely a little bit of a lack of, involvement and involved story that happened with the first one that maybe didn't happen so much on this one.
And can I be honest, because this was Paul Feig and Feig, I'm saying his name correctly?
Feig, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. Wow. Okay. So a deer, a female deer. All right. So because this was Paul Feig and Kristen Wiig, I was expecting a lot more fleshing out of all of the characters, because that's what made Bridesmaids so magical for me.
Yeah.
So when I sat down and I was watching this, and how can I best describe this? So there was an article in IO9 this week about the number of summer blockbusters that are just basically setups for sequels and not stories or movies in and of themselves. And that's what, amidst other problems, which I'll get into later, that's what this felt like to me. It felt like that this was just setting up the world. There wasn't a cohesive plot to it. There weren't fully fleshed out characters. Now, don't get me wrong. I am on team Kate McKinnon because she had me rolling out of my recliner chair. But, I expected more because of the people who were behind it.
I expected more, not just because of Feig and the actresses. I expected it more because of the universe. He had a wonderful universe to play with, and he just didn't. And I went to a website called Flickering Myth, and he said, I'd rather do it as a reboot so I wasn't tied to the old movies. But, so then why do a Ghostbusters movie if you don't want to be tied to Ghostbusters? So for me, the movie just didn't really feel that much like Ghostbusters.
Well, I mean, Carmen, you posted on Twitter that you really like this movie, right? Do you want to talk about that?
Well, I think I sort of fall somewhere in the middle, where I agree that, I mean, yes, I love Bridesmaids. Like, it's like one of my favorite comedies. I think it's amazing. And I think if you compared to Bridesmaids, definitely, this movie fell short in a few sort of character building plot areas. On the other hand, I also don't think this movie lacked, I feel like that it's sort of like the first Ghostbusters. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like the first Ghostbusters, I didn't feel like it was like this sort of, like, any more of a deep sort of character developing. I feel like they were sort of operating more or less on the same level in terms of plot and character development. Compared to Bridesmaids, it's absolutely different. But I don't know, I felt satisfied by it. Not Bridesmaids satisfied, but I did feel really satisfied when I came out of the theater. I laughed. I really liked the characters. Like, I some of the plot elements are maybe a little flat, but that was okay because it was so campy. Like, it didn't really matter to me. That was just sort of why I enjoyed it so much.
The one point I made to somebody about that, the sort of depth of it was that, I was like I even thought about the Melissa McCarthy movie Spy, where I was just like, I don't think that movie was like as deep an espionage film as could have been, and I felt like Ghostbusters was as deep a ghost busting film as there could have been. You know, like there's a little bit of that too, where I was like, I'm here for laughs. Like I wish there would have been more character, but you know, I still enjoyed it.
Based on what you were saying in terms of character building and whatnot, I felt like there was a lot more in the original movie. Like I felt like within 30 minutes, I knew who Ray Stantz, Ingot Spengler, and Pete Venkman were. And, you know, for all of Pete Venkman's lechery, there was a serious scientist underneath all of that, you know, all of those problematic elements. I felt like I know who those guys were. And then when Ernie Hudson came onto the scene, I definitely felt like I knew who he was. In comparison to Leslie Jones's character, I felt like I knew shit about her. I felt like it was, okay, let's put up sassy black, loud girl, cardboard cutout, and add some minor generic details like, oh, she works for the MTA and her uncle runs a funeral home, and she reads a lot of nonfiction. Other than that, I didn't really see the type of depth that Ernie Hudson's character, Winston Zeddemore, was allowed to have in the first movie. And even then, I think there was an article in the New York Times where Ernie Hudson had said, was talking about all of the racist crap that he had to deal with. And the guys defended him and tried to help him out. But a lot of his scenes were cut out of the original movie because, oh my God, black man having too much screen time. You don't want that. And the way it looked in at least the theater cut of the movie, I'm kind of wondering if something similar happened to Leslie Jones, where she actually had more screen time and thus more time to develop a character outside of this horrible, sassy black archetype that I felt that I saw.
Actually, I'd love to disagree with you. I thought that Leslie Jones was wonderful. I think she was actually the most well-rounded of the four of them, because Holtzman didn't really say very much except talk about technology. And Erin and Abby, you get some of Erin's backstory, but almost nothing at all about Abby's. I thought Patty was at least interesting, and I meet MTA workers all the time, and they have that same exasperated but slightly hopeful attitude that she has.
Well, there's also I wish I could just send you a bunch of articles because I also read something in IO9 a while back about how Paul Feig had switched Miss Melissa McCarthy's and Leslie Jones's characters because he wanted Leslie Jones's comedic genius to shine. Now, here's part of the problem. There's already this sort of malicious erasure and denigration about black women being in STEM. So when Paul Feig said that, he intimated that black women can't be educated and funny. And I know that hit hard with a lot of black nerd girls like myself, because I especially come from a STEM background. I am surrounded by black and other people of color who are nerds. And I was super hoping to see, Leslie Jones in some sort of STEM background instead of seeing her as the MTA worker. Now, if my guess is that they decided to do that to sort of keep in line with the original movie, because Winston Zeddemore also comes from a working class background. But again, this is 2016, and Paul Feig said he didn't want to do a reboot. So my issue is what is the harm of having Leslie Jones actually be a scientist, or Leslie Jones originally being Kristen Wiig's best friend, Abby?
I just wanted to add, I think Jennifer, I agree with Jennifer about Leslie Jones's character. And the one thing that they sort of started to do, and I was getting really excited, and then they backed off on it, was they had her be this huge New York history nerd, right?
Yes, I was so hoping for that.
Yeah, in the beginning, she makes the comment oh, this used to be, I can't remember what it was the oldest gambling den in New York, and then at some point she mentioned, that the subway tunnel was under the it was like the prison.
The prison, yeah,
yeah. So she like, and I was like, oh shit, that's awesome. She's gonna be like, you know, she knows New York, and then they sort of like backed
I
off.
thought she was going to bring. I thought she was going to bring way more facts than she did.
I mean, I think that what Jennifer was saying about maybe stuff got cut, I mean, that would make sense because that sort of subplot or that element of her character like got totally dropped. And that did bum me out a lot. And I think it also was, I think the other reason it feels a little egregious with her character is that like, you know, this movie was so many opportunities for so many different kinds of folks. Like you have an all-female reboot, you have I mean, we'll talk about Kate McKinnon, maybe I'm assuming next or later, not next. But, you know, a queer character probably, and you have Melissa McCarthy being like fat and awesome. And so I see the frustration where it's like you feel like Leslie Jones's character is sort of being shoved into this box when like other characters are getting to go out of their boxes. And that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think the problem I'm having with this reboot is that there were so many missed opportunities. You know, it could have been a story about 4 women, but you know, oh no, don't intimidate men or exclude men here. So it could have actually been this great opportunity for storytelling, and it kind of failed.
Well, I saw actually, Carol, on your Facebook page, one of your friends said, did they do anything with how women are treated in STEM fields? And you said not really.
No.
And there was a little scene there with Charles Dance, and watching Tywin Lannister in a comedy for the first time since The Golden Child was just really, really weird to me. But otherwise, no, there really wasn't. There was no discussion about women in STEM.
I mean, I think you're right about STEM, though they did, I was appreciated how they sort of touched on the sort of academia, the academia element, right? Where like a woman is struggling for tenure and she's like steps outside of this like really narrow box and suddenly has like been fired. Like, I mean, that was certainly part of it.
And yet another problem I had with this movie is that Abby was so very unsympathetic about that. I mean, her ex-friend, and we don't quite really know what happened between them. It's implied they had a falling out, but we don't know the specifics of it. That she was completely unsympathetic about her friend being so very, very close to tenure. Like, this is a big deal. A big deal, and she was completely uncaring. Later, she became more caring and concerned, but I feel like it was a character flip. The character was, you know, funny and brash, but not very sympathetic, and then later becomes more sympathetic, but less funny and brash now that I think about it.
I mean, that might have just been faulty writing as far as Abby's character arc, but given their history that is explained between Abby and Aaron, I didn't have trouble accepting Abby's lack of sympathy when Aaron came back to run to her to basically say, you have to deny that we were ever friends and this book existed. So that's how I saw it. And from that point of view, I can completely understand why Abby would be unsympathetic to her, because they had a 20-year history, give or take. And now her supposed friend with whom she's had 20 years of history is asking her to basically erase all of that history for her sake. And Abby's not getting any of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of how I saw it too. I mean, Carmen, did you have something you wanted to say about the Holtzman character?
I mean, I guess it would be changing topics, but I'm all about Kate McKinnon, and I was really like the whole movie. I was like, is it just my like big wishful gay imagination, or are they playing her really, really queer? And then I read that indeed they had intended her to be queer, and I guess they sort of scaled it back because the studio wanted them to scale it back. I mean, that was just what I was reading this morning. Does someone else know?
Yeah, Angela, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so Puffy did an interview with the Daily Beast where they asked if she was gay, and he kind of gave a grinning silent nod, I think is what they referred to it as. And he's
sure.
Like, and then he said, I hate to be coy about it, but when you're dealing with studios and that kind of thing, ... Like it was, he did sort of allude to that. And I, you know, when we were talking about like the Leslie Jones performance, I mean, I felt that same way about Kate McKinnon, where like, I don't know if it was a missed opportunity, like, because I don't know how much you were going to get that into, into the movie as well.
Right.
But like at that point where you're like doing the interview and the movie is out, just say like, I was like, you could just say she's gay. It's fine. Like, like
Right.
she could be gay and still do everything that she did in that movie. Like if it's just something that's like known, you know what I mean?
Kate McKinnon seemed to be the only character who was unapologetic about every aspect of her, which I think that's why she's gotten so much love. And I mean, like, truth be told, I'm not gonna lie, I'm just kind of like, the things that I would do to Kate McKinnon if given consent.
Yeah,
like, I'm not gonna sit up here and lie. Like, that amount of confidence, and she owned her geekiness in a way that, like, you don't get to see in a major motion picture, especially not from a woman, and especially not from a potentially queer woman. It's always been like, geekiness has been this thing that you should be ashamed of. And she's like, no, fuck that. I'm a smart inventor. I'm a goddamn engineer. Or as, like she said to her mentor, safety lights are for dudes.
Yeah, that's why I'm putting that on a t-shirt, by the way. Safety lights are for dudes. Like, there was so many, even like the celebration of a Faraday cage. Like, have we ever seen that in a major motion picture from like, a female, possibly queer nerd? Like I was like, that was worth my price of admission right there. You gave me the line about safety lights and you celebrated the Faraday cage. Like, that's it. Thank you.
Oh, no. She could also think of 7 things to do with the dead in one day. I mean.
Yeah, I mean, she, the thing that kind of, I guess, frustrated me reading those interviews was that, like, I was thinking about a movie that was really formative for me when I was a kid, which was Fried Green Tomatoes, which came out in 1991 and was the gayest thing I'd ever seen, though I didn't know it at the time. And then, like, years later, rewatched it and was like, oh my God, like, they're married. Like, they're lesbians and they're married. But, like, the show, they never actually say it. Like, it's super subtle. And even though they had cut out any explicit lesbian content, like, it won all these, like, awards for, like, representation, like, from the gay community because it was just the gayest movie ever. And then it sort of frustrated me that now it's 2016, and it's weird. It is weird to me that he had to have that, like, wink nod conversation with an interviewer about her being queer when, like, she was coding really queer and, like, clearly was, and, like, it's 2016,
Yeah. I mean, it missed opportunity. That's a phrase that keeps coming up in this conversation, but it's not missed. It's just failed.
I mean, I guess I should add that I mean, in terms of just in Holtzman's character, Holtzman, like, I think it is and is not. Like, I think it's a missed opportunity to have an openly gay character in a movie, though there was still a gay character in that movie. So for me, it's sort of like, it's this weird, like, it's exactly how I feel about Fried Green Tomatoes, which is like, in some ways, it's like, yeah, it's weird that, like, they don't ever, like, even though they're both clearly lesbians, or they're both clearly queer and are with each other and have a child, like, it's weird that they never say it and they never really show it, but it's still a gay movie. So it's, you know what I mean? Like, it's this weird sort of middle space where it's like, which I think is true of, like, everyone who sort of fights to see representations of themselves in anything, where it's like, you kind of take what you can, or at least for me, especially in terms of queer and fat characters and Latina women, like, I feel like I sort of struggle. I'm like, I don't get a lot, so I take what I sort of, like, latch on to what I can, which is maybe not an ideal situation, but it's how I sort of cope with that.
Hey, that's the stuff that fanfic is made of.
I mean, Angela, I wanted to ask you about, you wrote an article before this movie came out called "No Matter How Good It Is, the new Ghostbusters Can't Win."
Yes.
And I was just wondering if you could talk about, now that it's out, to what extent do you think it won or didn't win?
I mean, it's honestly, like, it's doing better than I thought it was in terms of, like, kind of critical reception. I mean, I think it's maybe going to make about 50 million this weekend, which isn't terrible, but in the, like, post-Marvel world where if you don't, break somewhere in the 100 million figure, somehow it's not the biggest thing ever. But, the point I was trying to make in that piece was that, like, and I think we're even kind of touching on it here in a lot of different ways, which is that there's almost too much expectation on a movie like this to please everybody. Like, if you're never going to please the, like, the kind of people who are just like, girls can't be Ghostbusters. Like, that entire, section of the internet was never going to probably have its mind changed by this. And no matter what, it was just always going in with this baggage of nostalgia that we all have about the original, right? Like, you can't divorce it from the other thing that you saw, in 1984. And so you can't not, like I've already seen reviews where people were like, oh, well, it's trying too hard to be the old one, or it's not trying hard enough to be the old one, or it's, and like you can't, because you made, like I think somebody said earlier, like, well, then why make a Ghostbusters movie? And like there might be some truth to that, because like you're either trying to reinvent the wheel, which, you can't fully do all the time, or you're trying to make something so divorced from that it's, wholly unique and original, but then it doesn't make sense because it's not part of a canon of anything, right? So there was this thing going into it where I just, it came out of a conversation we were having at the office where I was just like, it's not even that you can't please all the people all the time. You can barely please some of the people a little bit at the time. So, I mean, there was just, I felt a sense going into this, which I think has borne out in some ways and actually done better than I thought it would in others, that there was kind of no way for this movie to win in a sort of broad sense. I mean, like I said, I think that what we've learned is like it has pleased more people, myself included, than I thought it was going to. I mean, I always thought I would like it, but with a lot of caveats and reservations, a lot of which we're kind of having here in this discussion, because, I mean, it is a lot to put on one movie that's sole purpose is pretty much just to make you laugh. You know what I mean? Like there's just so much of that. There's so much of that there, and there's so much of the baggage. I think one of the things that I've been thinking about in this conversation, and also was thinking about as I was watching it, was how blatant it was, like in the overall plot, to address the actual problem that the movie itself had. It was almost meta-reverential in that way, because I mean, really, it's about like 4 very smart women who were basically like trying to prove that what they were doing had value against a guy in a basement who was trying to destroy them. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that was macrocosmic on many, many levels.
And and like I was like, when they first like had that confrontation with him, I think it was Ronan was his name or whatever. Like when they go in there, I was like, wait, are they actually going to talk to a guy who lives in the basement? Yes, they are. And like when they're reading the YouTube comments, that one, like the ain't no bitches gonna bust no ghost.
My audience just laughed.
Yeah, I appreciated that nod. I felt like they did a sufficient number of nods toward that element. Yeah.
And spoiler alert, I guess, but when Bill Murray shows up and Melissa McCarthy has that whole line where Abby has that line where she's just like, oh, well, it's so easy for you to sit there and criticize when you don't really do anything. And I was like, I see what you did there, friends.
I definitely, yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No. That was the end of my point. So like, that was what I was, when I wrote that piece earlier this week, it was just sort of like, there's so many things that, this movie is going to have to knock down to, even get acceptance, let alone traction. That, for all of its flaws, and I agree with everybody on the panel that there are many, I was like, it did a lot better than I thought it could have, which, I will take that on face value. So that was the point.
Well, and Angela, I just want to say for people who might be listening to this in the future and are farther away from all the controversy and don't know exactly what we're talking about, I mean, there was a lot of, like you said, this like girls can't be Ghostbusters sentiment. And the first trailer for this movie was literally the most disliked movie trailer in YouTube history.
Yeah, most downvoted YouTube trailer of all time, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought there was an interesting phenomenon where I think a lot of women saw the first trailer and weren't that enthused with the movie. I mean, actually, Harold Ramis's daughter wrote an article about this. But then once they saw the giant backlash against it, it kind of turned seeing this movie into a statement. And I was just wondering if any of you guys, what you thought of that kind of phenomenon, or if you felt that at all.
No, I've always been on board because it's Ghostbusters. Even though the trailer wasn't that exciting, I didn't think it was terrible either. And I have always planned on seeing it. So, for what it's worth. I
mean, Carmen, could you talk about that?
Sure. I mean, this is sort of the problem, right? When like you belong to a group of people who are underrepresented in media, where when something comes along, you want it to be good. You want to like it because you're like, this is like, right, this is the moment. And so I mean, I remember seeing the trailer and being like, okay, okay, all right, maybe, but I will go see it because I want. I mean, there's this idea. I don't know. There's like sort of this frustrating element of like, I read an article. I think it was from last year where they had researched that like, movies with more diverse casts make more money, and yet they don't get made as often. And I guess there's just sort of this weird thing where it's like I want like capitalism to do something good for once, and I want like there to be like a groundswell of support for this movie, and then people will be like, oh wow, we can have like all these different kinds of characters be the centers of movies, and it's and then want to make more of them, but then you have this problem where like that's actually already been done, and yet it doesn't really help. So there's this really just frustrating thing as like a person who wants to see a movie where it's like you want that money to get kind of thrown into it. You're like, I want to have choices. Like I want to be like, oh man, there's like 3 movies with like all female cast this weekend. Like, how do I pick? Like how do I pick which one to go see this night? And yet, so I feel like I just really want, I want to love this movie, and I do. Like I really did. I did enjoy it very much, but like I think I wasn't feeling crazy about it from the trailer, but I was like, I'm gonna go see it. It's gonna happen. Like I'm gonna go pay for my ticket. I'm gonna go because like I want to support it. Yeah, and I guess I also just wanted to say, regarding like this sort of controversy issue, like I mean, I don't really have a lot to say to those dudes, because I really honestly like I sort of like check them out of my mind. Like I don't really think about them very much because they're just so awful. But I do think it's really interesting, this idea that like a movie made in 1984 is like a sacred text that cannot be like reinterpreted or rethought about or recast or reboot, or the idea is just so strange to me. It just seems so against like art and how art works, right? That a text is like a fixed immovable thing that can never be reimagined in any way. And I find that idea so strange, and I think it's really interesting that like this is a hill that certain kinds of men, that's the hill they want to die on, is like, that like Ghostbusters in 1984 is a perfect fixed text that can never be reinterpreted ever again. And it's like, all right, if that's the hill you want to die on, that's fine. But like, yeah, it's very weird.
But we're going to go and do it anyway. So,
right. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I can chime in a little bit, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I'm done. Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
So, I saw the first trailer and I was underwhelmed. But I wanted to go and see it because, unfortunately, I still have what I like to call the wait your turn problematic ideal stuck in the back of my head. Whereas, here I get a movie with women as Ghostbusters, and there's the token Black woman. So, is this going to be representative of history where women with multiple marginalizations, women of color, women with disabilities, trans women, working class women, poor women, now that white women have had their turn, do we get our turn next? And it is a problematic ideal to have. So, for the longest time, I really wasn't going to go see the new movie because it was very much, fuck this wait your turn shit. There are other movies I could be seeing that do feature women with multiple marginalizations. At the same time, looking at the backlash that this movie was getting just because there were women wearing and using proton packs, I had that self-hating wait your turn idea come up and surface within me. And am I glad that my money went to the movie? Yes, and this is why. Because the Easter egg at the end gave me that little spark of hope that maybe in the next movie I won't have to wait my turn.
Can we discuss the Easter egg?
Yeah, sure.
Spoilers!
So, yeah, Carol, do you want to say something about the Easter egg?
I left before the credits rolled. My bladder was screaming. I had to leave.
So, do you not know what it is, or did you read up on it later?
I do not know what it is.
Are we spoiling?
Yeah,
Please.
do it. Go ahead.
I would love it. I would love to hear it.
Okay, so do you remember the recording device that Holtzman and Abby used to play a prank on air?
Yes.
So in the Easter egg, right at the end, you see Patty listening to the recording device, and she's like, And the ladies go up to her and they said, well, what's wrong? Do you hear anything? And Patty just looks at them all and she said, what's Zool?
Oh, my
Yeah.
God.
Yeah. I shrieked. I shrieked at the end of the movie. And people are looking around me like, huh? I want to be like, get out. Get out right now. Get out. It's like, it's the gatekeeper.
Okay, I feel so much better about the movie now.
Yeah, so that's why, like, the Easter egg will, like, fuck this waiting turns. I want to see all types of women in the sequel. All types of women. Get it better, Paul Feig. Make it better.
The sequel's where Patty and Holtzman get together, right? Like, I've already established that.
Yes!
I'm reading that script right now. Like, come on.
You want to see Patty as the gatekeeper and Holtzman as the keymaster.
Oh my God. Oh, don't toy with my emotion. Don't toy with my emotion.
I feel like that fanfic has already been written. Like, I feel like you just willed it into existence. It exists in the world.
Kate McKinnon Forever.blogspot.com. That's my site.
Do we actually know there's going to be a sequel? Definitely. Like, has that?
No,
we don't.
I don't think
okay.
so. Oh yeah.
I mean, Angela, how much money would this have to make, you think, to, like, justify a sequel?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would have to, I think it would probably have to make, like, I mean, I have no idea who makes decisions at studios, but, like, probably 150, 200, like, you know what I mean? And I mean, internationally, like, maybe, like, it's not going to open in China. We've already established that, which is where a lot of box office comes from now. But, I mean, it could do well on DVD. It could actually end up doing better in theaters than, like, you know, than maybe people had thought if it has a long enough run. But yeah, I mean, I really hope there could be a sequel, but also I feel like it might be a little bit of a long shot, but you know, well, time will tell.
Well, what's the deal with it not opening in China? Because I saw that they don't like ghost movies or something. It seems weird. Cause...
there's something about like the things that have like superstition and things like that. They don't always let those open in China. I'll find out.
Actually, according to Wikipedia, it cost $144 million to make, and I don't know if that includes all of the budget, like advertising. So I think it needs to earn in excess of $150 million in order to be considered for a sequel.
Censorship guidelines in China prohibit showing of films that promote cults or superstition. Which, you know, it is promoting the cult of Kate McKinnon, but other than that...
It just seems weird, because I don't remember really hearing that before. And it just makes me wonder, is that really the reason, or I don't know.
Or is it something else, or, yeah, I mean, is it one of those things that they sort of selectively, you know, impose, whether or not, you know, I mean, because I feel like there have been other movies that, I mean, I guess it would be cults or superstition, but like there's tons of monster movies and stuff like that. Like if you think about ghosts more as monsters than, you know, specters in the night, like I don't know exactly how they're drawing the lines of what cults and superstition.
I mean, I might be making this up, but I feel like Pacific Rim made a huge percentage of its take in China, which...
Pacific Rim did make a huge percentage of its take in China, but we're also Pacific Rim is also dealing very much with themes from anime. So that's a completely different story. And those are monsters in the very strictest sense, like very much ancient Chinese, ancient Japanese mythology monsters that we see rising from the rim. So there's that. But I don't know personally enough about Chinese culture or the current government that is sitting in power to make any statement otherwise. So
yeah.
Well, I mean, what do you guys just think of this idea of taking familiar properties from the 80s, say, or whatever, and gender swapping them in general? Do you think, is that a direction, would you like to see them do that with more movies?
I love that idea. Yeah.
All-female Goonies? Is that what you're telling me we could have?
Goonies never said. It depends. It really depends, because not everything that has been taken from the 80s and remade, gender swapped or no, has been good. Cough, cough, gem. Oh my God, I can't believe I said it out loud. Cough, cough. And also, there are a lot of things that need to be updated for context. Like, I did especially appreciate in the new Ghostbusters how they updated the culture of New York, how they integrated social media and YouTube, and they updated the devices.
Well, and that they couldn't afford to rent a firehouse.
Yes,
right.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like how ridiculous rent prices are. Like, I appreciated it from that perspective. But here's the thing: if you are going to gender swap or even a race swap, you can't do it in a vacuum. You have to take into consideration how being a woman, or especially being a woman of color, or being a queer / woman / person of color in an environment like, I don't know, let's say Los Angeles, is going to be different now than it was back in 1987. Like, say if they wanted to do Troop Beverly Hills again.
I mean, I sort of feel like they seem determined to reboot every single franchise, board game, comic book, novel, like ever created. Like, I feel like we're just like in that direction. So,
but not Thundercats. Where's my Thundercats?
Just give it time. Just give it time. But I sort of feel like if they're gonna do it, if they're determined to do it, why not do it with, gender or race swapping or any of those, why not do it in an interesting way, while, of course, like Jennifer said, like taking into account, like what it means to be various folks. So I sort of feel like I'm sort of pro, I don't know, I feel like it's just like inherent, like just like queer the text, and I mean queer in like sort of a more like sort of universal sense, like just like queer, like, like make the text, like take the text and like if you're gonna redo it, just like mess with it, and like add new things, like think about it in some new and interesting way instead of just like rebooting it.
I did also just want to talk a little bit more about the humor in this movie, because I was really cracking up for about the first third of the movie, and I noticed I was laughing a lot less toward the end. And I just had one other observation I want to make about the humor in this versus the original Ghostbusters, because I felt like in the original, this is something I saw in a review, but I agree with this. It said that in the original Ghostbusters, you had the wacky characters and then you had the non-wacky characters. So like the Sigourney Weaver character in the original is not a wacky character, I guess until she gets possessed a little bit. But, they're sort of like fairly normal people. And I felt like in this movie, pretty much every character is a wacky character down to like, bit characters and walk-ons and stuff. And I felt that this might have had a little bit more sense of reality if there had been a little, just some more non-wacky characters around.
Yeah, I agree. I found a lot of the characters just very unrealistic. Like and that's a strange thing to be complaining about in a movie about ghost busting, But there it is. The graffiti artist. Like I don't know why Patty didn't. I don't know what kind of authority the MTA has, but can't she, give him a citation or something?
Right. He seems to come there often enough.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And I think that's also, there was that chemistry of all of the different comedy styles that you saw in the first movie that you didn't really see in the new movie. I mean, like, Harold Ramis had very much the very intellectual comedy going. Bill Murray had very much the dry, sarcastic comedy going, a little wacky. And then Dan Aykroyd had that very upbeat and very almost sort of childish in that beautiful, naive way. And I didn't really see that sort of chemistry of different comedic styles in the new Ghostbusters that I saw in the first Ghostbusters. And I was kind of hoping to see that. But yeah, no, I think that's a legitimate criticism, is that it's almost as if they were trying to have too many of the same characters, which in writing fiction, that's a big no-no. Your characters should not be interchangeable like that. And I'm going to be honest, I don't know why Chris Hemsworth was there. I mean, I do, because #female gaze, but otherwise I'm like, why are you here?
Actually, for me, one of the biggest problems I had with this movie was the reverse sexism of his character, Kevin, being hired and kept on for his looks. And had this been 4 men hiring a hot woman, I'd be protesting that as well.
But isn't that sort of the thing though, right? Like that's the inversion. I mean, I mean reverse sexism. Like the joke is that if you had it reversed, like that stereotype exists reversed all the time, and so the movie was reversing the stereotype, right? But they weren't playing that straight. Like that was clearly like a wink to an existing problematic trope that exists.
It was definitely a wink to an existing problematic trope, but we can't apply the same reverse sexism there because reverse sexism doesn't really exist because we don't have the power of the institution, but I could totally tell that they were playing up on the trope, but the thing was I was having the same thing, like, why are you here? It was so unnecessary to the story.
Yeah.
And that was definitely one of the ways where I would say Paul Feig do better.
Yeah, you were saying that, did you think this movie was funny? Actually, I loved the first scene. I thought that was really funny, and it had one of the movie's absolute favorite lines of mine, which is, hi, look at this old house. It had many features of the time, like a fence to keep the Irish out. That had me laughing.
Yeah, the face bidet and the anti-Irish security fence had me laughing, and I'm like, oh God, but it was still that guilty laugh where it's like, oh, this would not have been funny in the 50s, that.
Yeah, but I thought that's why it was funny now.
I mean, did you guys agree that this movie was hysterical for about 30 minutes and then it was kind of, sort of funny?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say the first 30 minutes even. I liked it in the beginning. It kind of dropped for me and then it picked up steam later. I mean, but I really wanted to champion this movie, but reverse gender. I mean, it's playing with gender. That could be so interesting. But for me, the reason I can't champion it is because it's just not funny enough.
I was really same. And I think a lot of it has to do with, there's just this, the ladies don't seem to spend as much time together as the original Ghostbusters did not Ghostbustering. You know what I'm saying? It seemed like in the original Ghostbustering, you saw a lot more of Pete, Winston, Ray, and Egon still being in the office, but hanging out and or working and having other conversations. Whereas I didn't really see a lot of that, so I didn't feel a group chemistry develop. And I would have loved to champion this movie, but unfortunately I can't for very many reasons. I think it was funny from the get-go. Yes, I think it started out strong, but it did kind of fall apart in that it fell apart in many, many ways, but in what you're saying, Dave, is that I think that it wasn't funny because that chemistry hadn't been established.
Well, like, for example, I mean, the whole arc of the plot is supposed to be, I think, that Aaron and Abby's friendship is estranged at the beginning, and then Aaron makes she risks her life jumping into the portal at the end to save Abby as the symbol that their friendship has been reforged. And I felt like that was had not been set up well enough throughout the movie to have a big emotional impact at the end.
Yeah, to go back to what we were saying before, like I do want to see the 2.5 hour
yes,
because I feel like there was probably more fleshing out of relationships. There was probably more, like establishing, who Patty was and who Holtz was, and like maybe not having them just be, jokes the whole time. Like I think that they're probably, I hope that there is actually that longer version of it, where we kind of get some more of those answers that we kind
I mean, I would watch like a 4-hour version of that movie.
I sat through David Lynch's 4-hour version of Dune. I can sit through a 4-hour version of the new Ghostbusters, no problem. But
yeah, I'm all about that.
All right, so the Rotten Tomatoes ratings for the original Ghostbusters has it at 97%, it has this at 75%, and Ghostbusters 2 at 50%. And I'm just curious what you guys think of those ratings.
We're really going to talk about Ghostbusters 2, the sequel that shall not be named?
I mean, does anyone strongly disagree with those ratings, or do those sound about right?
I don't know if the original Ghostbusters deserves that high, because I haven't seen it recently, and I remember thinking some things were strange. Oh, right. I remember thinking Walter Peck actually had some points.
Yeah!
Like, wait a minute. This is kind of an unlawful thing that they're doing and could be dangerous to the city and perhaps should be studied more carefully. So I actually felt a little more sympathetic towards Peck the second time. Not the second, the 50th time around, but seeing it as a much more sophisticated adult. So.
I actually heard that actor became so hated as a result of playing that role that it was actually kind of dangerous for him to walk around on the street after the movie came out. That people hated that character so much.
Oh my!
Well, it didn't help that he was also the newscaster in the first Die Hard, who exposed.
Was
yeah,
William Atherton?
Yeah, he was the newscaster in Die Hard who exposes Mrs. McClane to Hans Gruber. So that probably didn't help either. Again, like, there's so many 80s movies I could talk about. Like, if they want to do a Die Hard reboot and gender swap it, I'm all for it.
I just wanted to pick up on the thing about the Ghostbusters maybe in the first movie maybe being irresponsible nerds, because I saw a review that made the really interesting point that in a way the villain in this new movie is kind of like a reflection of the Ghostbusters from the original movie, this kind of like nerd who is not, not taking adequate safety precautions, and that the back when in 1984 the nerds were always the underdogs and it was very easy to root for the nerds. And in the intervening years, we've seen kind of the dark side of nerds and megalomaniacal nerds and their, tech startups and stuff like that. And I thought that was a really interesting observation that the new movie is interrogating the old movie in that way as well.
I mean, it's an interesting observation, but I still find it weak because in the original Ghostbusters, well, at least in the new Ghostbusters, the antagonist knew that what he was doing, he knew what he was doing was unsafe. And he bluntly states it repeatedly as his method to end the world. Whereas in the original Ghostbusters, these are trained scientists who are doing things that may or may not be safe, but they don't have the malicious intent behind it.
Okay, but you don't think the new movie was making any commentary about the dark side of nerds and nerd culture?
Oh, no. I definitely think it was making the commentary on the dark side of nerd culture. And there's no question about it, especially, like you said, little white dude in a basement, on the internet, trolling. Like, they had a literal troll as their antagonist.
It sort of seemed, I think what the difference is intention versus not intention, because there's a difference between doing something that's really dangerous and being forget the consequences. But he wasn't doing that. He was I am going to bring about this situation. He was really intentional about what he was doing.
Right, no, there's no question that this guy is bad in a way that the original Ghostbusters weren't bad. I just thought it was an interesting observation that the antagonist in this movie is the nerdy guy in his basement with the ghost machine.
Right,
when those were the heroes in the first movie.
I mean, I think, it's funny, as I kept thinking after I left the theater, I was thinking about that season of Buffy.
With the trio?
Yeah, the trio.
Oh, God.
And I was thinking about that sort of commentary on the dark side of sort of that misogynistic edge to to certain kinds of nerd culture. I don't really much more to say than that. I've been thinking about it ever since I saw it last night. I was oh, that's sort of similar kind of to that season of Buffy.
Oh, it definitely is similar. The good thing is that at least since we're setting up this dichotomy, that at least in the new Ghostbusters, we actually get to see that oh no, actually there are lots of great nerds who want to push boundaries and be inclusive, or hopefully, even though they don't really present well as we've discussed earlier doing that, but it's very much setting up like this dichotomy about the dark side of nerdom. And I mean, like, I don't know. I personally have issues affixing nerdom to a dichotomy like that. And I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, but a lot of the behavior that we see in Roland, I think is what his name is, that could have happened regardless of being attached to a specific fandom. Like, that darkness could have come out in anything.
But I do feel like it's sort of about weaponizing knowledge, right? Like, that's the idea, is that, like, I feel like, you know, historically we thought of like nerds, you know, as like oppressed group, and like knowledge was something like laughable. Like, there was like sort of nerds and jocks, right? And again, like, yeah, and all dichotomies are like false, essentially, right? But thinking about like, you know, weaponizing, you know, artillery, or weaponizing physical brute strength or power, and like knowledge was like sort of this idea, like, oh, it's this pure thing, and like if you attain knowledge, like you can use it. And I think the idea that like knowledge can also be weaponized is like a really specific and important thing. And I'm not saying this movie was like making that point in any unique or interesting way different than like other sort of kinds of things have, but I just think that's sort of for me, what feels like that interesting element of like talking about what we are calling like the dark side of nerddom.
And especially with the dark side of nerdom. So I have issues with calling nerds an oppressed group. Were they a bullied group? Definitely. But there was no like overlying political system that beat down on them. And I do appreciate Melissa McCarthy actually saying that, like, okay, you got bullied a lot. You were bullied. Not so much dismissing his feelings, but acknowledging that, like, you were bullied a lot. There were lots of terrible people, but they managed to not, you know, blow up the city and, you know, full of ghosts. So that I especially appreciated, because there have been so many people online who are trying to grab onto being a nerd as being a marginalized group, and that's not what being marginalized is.
I'm not sure I agree 100% with what you're saying, because I mean, I was really under the threat of being beaten up pretty much on a daily basis just for being verbal and literate. And I grew up in a world, I mean, of course I was a teen in the 80s. This jocks versus nerds war really did exist, at least in the world that I was raised in, and I was very much struggling to survive.
All right, so guys, this is an interesting conversation, but we're at 90 minutes. I feel like we need this is like a whole new can of worms that we're gonna could go on for another hour.
Yeah, then please do.
Yeah, sorry.
So no, I mean, it's interesting, but I think we should probably need to start wrapping this up now. So just on the subject of the new Ghostbusters movie, or the impact it's going to have, or what you're hoping to see, anyone have any final thoughts about that? So Angela, what do you think? Final thoughts about the legacy or something about this Ghostbusters movie?
I enjoyed it. I did laugh. It obviously was lacking, but since we've been having this conversation, I'm now saying Patty and Holtz forever. So that's the only thing I'm gonna leave on.
All right, cool. And Carmen, final thoughts?
Patty and Holtz forever.
It's a hashtag now.
Yeah. I did enjoy it, and this has been a really great conversation. I'm glad that it exists, and I look forward. I hope a sequel happens, and I look forward to them sort of tackling the problems of the first, and like giving us even new and more amazing stuff to work with and to watch. So yeah, looking forward to that. Hopefully, it'll happen.
Carol?
I thought it was fun and funny, but not fun and funny enough, unfortunately. The movie I wanted to see wasn't the movie I got to see, and I wanted to see a movie of, like, 32 years later. This is the world that the Ghostbusters left behind, and you know, this is what the world is like now, and here are these scientists researching it.
Well, I mean, they've made this Ghost Core, and I think it's going to be like Star Wars, where they're going to be cranking out all sorts of Ghostbusters, you know, material. So I wouldn't give up hope that you'll see a continuation of the Ghostbusters Prime universe.
Okay.
Jennifer, any final words?
So I'm getting on the hashtag Patty Holtzman Forever crew. Obviously. I walked into this movie hoping that my personal views of what I saw on the trailers regarding Patty weren't going to be true. Unfortunately, they were. I'm still hoping that the director's cut will do something to clear that up, where we'll see Patty as a much more nuanced character. I'm not gonna lie and say I didn't laugh, because again, Kate McKinnon, oh my God, she's absolutely wonderful. But somebody asked me what I thought about it, and I said, well, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't good. And if they have the opportunity to make a sequel, I'm hoping that they will address everything that we've talked about. And I know that there are a couple of things that a lot of us haven't had a chance to talk about. I'm hoping that they will use that sequel as an opportunity to do better. Do better. Because we have so many different types of little girls out there with different experiences, different marginalizations. And I hope that if they can, I hope that if they have the opportunity to make a sequel, like, I would love to see a queer woman of color with a disability who is a Ghostbuster. So I have at least 3 friends who can look up there and start crying and say, that's me, that's my story. That's what I would like to see out of the sequel.
All right, well, I think that's a good note to end on. So we've been speaking with Angela Watercutter, Carol Pinchefsky, Jennifer Cross, and Carmen Maria Machado. So guys, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Angela Watercutter, Carmen Maria Machado, Jennifer Cross, and Carol Pinchefsky for joining us on the show. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider making a small contribution via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. That's what listener Arthur Brown does every time he hears an episode that he particularly enjoys. He sent us his latest bonus payment after listening to our conversation in episode 209 about the late great science fiction author Ian M. Banks. Arthur writes that the episode was, quote, better than a seance. So big thanks to Arthur Brown for his continued support. And if you just can't be bothered to go through all the hassle of making individual contributions to Geek's Guide to the Galaxy, why not make it easier on yourself by signing up to give us an automatic payment for each episode over at patreon.com/geeks. Almost 200 listeners are currently supporting us on Patreon, and almost 150 have supported us via PayPal. So big thanks to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.